All right, hello. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Sustainability Speaker Series for the federal community. I'm Michelle Hawkins, Director for Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer in the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And to my federal employees, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today to learn more about your role in our shift to more sustainable and resilient operations, and in particular, how we can electrify and decarbonize our federal operations in ways that benefit all Americans. We have a very dynamic speaker joining us today, Donnel Baird of BlocPower, who is actively and effectively decarbonizing buildings and cities, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his remarks. But before we get started, I do need to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. The recording, as well as information on future events, can be found on our website at sustainability.gov. And we will not be using the raise hand feature in this webinar. We did get a lot of questions, and so we reviewed those questions and we used them to inform our discussion today, as well as the Q&A portion of this event. So again, thank you all for being here. And now I'd like to hand it off to the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer, Andrew Mayock. Andrew.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone who is joining us today. We're excited to be back in the Federal Speaker Series. We're very excited, as Michelle mentioned, to have Donnel Baird join us today and share his experience and answer questions that have been fed into us by participants today. I'm excited in particular to be joining you live, broadcasting live from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory here in Colorado, where we're on a visit to do what we're about to talk about here, drive and deliver on the President's Federal Sustainability Plan. As we do at the beginning of these conversations, we've got a few slides up front to share with you the highlights of the Federal Sustainability Plan, what it is, where we're headed. I want to keep that short and get to the conversation with Donnel. And because we're here live in Colorado, we're going to hear from Sheila Hayter, who joins us from NREL, who's going to tell us a little bit about the site that we're visiting today and its connectivity to the Federal Sustainability Plan and its work. So with that, let's move to the next slide. As I noted, a couple slides up front just to ground us. One is, who we are and what we do. So it's the role of the Office of the Chief Sustainability Officer in the White House to develop and implement the Federal Sustainability Plan, to do that in concert with other federal leaders, such as the Department of Energy, hosting the lab here today, the General Services Administration, the Office of Management and Budget, the Climate Policy Office, other key partners like the Department of Defense are all in on the development and implementation and driving of the sustainability plan. And we do that here from the White House to deliver on that goal. And we do that in close concert with agency chief sustainability officers in particular. And I would also note in this new era, in this urgent time of delivering on the climate crisis, is that it's a much broader community that we're working with than in the past. So it's not only the chief sustainability officers like myself and my counterparts in agencies, but it is the secretaries and the deputy secretaries and the chief acquisition officers and the chief financial officers and the energy managers and the fleet managers. And it is certainly a very large community that is delivering on the plan as a whole. Next slide. A couple quick words about the plan itself. More information and pointers to where you can find more information on this in the slides ahead, but just want to note a couple things. One is the big idea here is to put the federal government back into a leadership position where we are leading by example again, as we are now, to go deliver on some very ambitious and very necessary targets and goals, moving our consumption of electricity as the nation's largest electricity consumer to 100% carbon-free electricity no later than 2030, to electrify our full federal fleet of approximately 640,000 vehicles, the largest fleet in the globe, to decarbonize and to electrify and to make much more efficient our real estate portfolio. So to reduce by 50% emissions from buildings by 2032 and have net zero emissions by 2045. To do all the buying that we do as the nation's largest buyer of goods and services, to make sure that we're using the federal footprint to deliver on sustainability for the American people through that work. And to do all that, particularly here we are again in another summer where we are seeing the profound effects of climate. Take a look at, 10 inches of rain for our citizens and federal colleagues in St. Louis a couple of days ago in one day. Wildfires that continue to plague the West, and not to mention the drought that has extended into yet another year of record-breaking drought. So the manifest symptoms of the climate crisis, how we adapt to those, and how we create greater resilience is a key part of the plan as we move forward. To do all that in concert with the issues on the side of this page, to make sure that we're mainstreaming it in the federal workforce, we're integrating environmental justice and equity, and we're utilizing our leverage to bring more public and private sector partners to the fight. Next slide. There's that big plan. People often ask us as we talk about the federal sustainability plan, saying, oh, 2050 is really nice. What about today? And want to make manifestly clear, this is all about today, and how we deliver here in 2022 and make, as President Biden says, the 20s a decade of action. And so, our goals that we're primarily focused on is in the here and now, and how we deliver and put immediate points on the board while we build systems throughout federal government to deliver on the plan. And so federal government, I'm happy to report now in this third federal speaker series, we're making excellent progress across all of these goals. In particular, I'd raise up the federal fleet activity in that last year in 2021, the federal government purchased about 650 zero emission vehicles, which is approximately 1% of annual light duty acquisitions. Here in 2022, we're tracking towards 10% of our acquisitions, so 10x what we did last year, and approximately 3,500 vehicles be zero emission vehicles. And in that fleet and in that portfolio, really exciting vehicles like the F-150 Ford Lightning is going to be in there, to the number of 500 vehicles. So we're really part of and leading here in the federal government the transportation revolution here in the transition. So lots of work and lots of progress like that across each of these issues. We're seeing it now in this visit to Colorado. We had an opportunity to visit Fort Carson, the Denver Federal Center, EPA regional headquarters in Denver, and then now here at NREL. And I can report in the very top line, extraordinary progress agency to agency in the region as a whole. Next slide. What we're here for today is to reach out to the federal community, for those of us who full-time job is sustainability, to those of us who are curious and interested and concerned. So we want to make clear that a big part of this conversation is to widen the conversation as a whole and widen the consciousness and the participation to everyone in the federal community. It's going to take all of us to deliver on the urgent moment that we're in. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I would refer you to the letter that the president sent to us all back in December, which is highlighted on this page. Next slide. And again, here, as we move to Sheila and Donnel, the point here is to also, to educate, to inspire. And as noted, we're super excited about Donnel joining us today, and that he's on the front lines, particularly in the building sector of what we're doing as well. And he's making all sorts of incredible progress in a really hard, as many of these things are, in a really hard component and technical area. So really eager to hear what he has to say and the progress that he reports, and to field some of the questions that have come in for him from you. Next slide. And there is not a live shot, but I can assert and confirm this is what it indeed looked like. And I'm inside this campus right now. It's a really exciting space. And I'm going to turn it over to Sheila Hayter right now. And Sheila's the FEMP program lead and she here at NREL. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her role and a little bit about NREL. Sheila.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you for that introduction and for inviting me to be a host for today's webinar. I am looking forward to the conversation that we're about to hear. Just to give you a little bit more background about my role here at NREL, I am the Laboratory Program Manager for the Federal Energy Management Program here at NREL, which means that I oversee and manage the portfolio work that NREL does in support of FEMP's activities. So my portfolio that I oversee is very much related to today's discussion. So another reason why I'm excited about being here today. I just want to let you know that we are absolutely thrilled that you are broadcasting today's Sustainability Speakers webinar from NREL. We've appreciated this opportunity to host you and your team at our Golden, Colorado South Table Mountain campus this week. We're glad that you're here. So thank you for being here and thank you for broadcasting from our campus today. To help those of you on the call for a little bit of background, I'll introduce NREL briefly. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, is a Department of Energy national laboratory, and it is the only laboratory within the DOE 17 lab complex whose mission is laser focused on advancing science and engineering of energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, and renewable power technologies with the goal of providing the knowledge to integrate optimized energy systems. Here at NREL, we aim to walk the talk in everything that we do. This means that we are pushing the boundaries both with our research activities as well as how we operate our own facilities. So it's serendipitous today, Andrew, that you are broadcasting the Sustainable Speaker Series webinar that's focused on electrification from within the Department of Energy's, and for that matter, the US federal government's very first large zero energy office building. The building that we're in now is known as the Research Support Facility. It's a 358,000 square foot office building that has operated as a net zero energy facility since the construction was completed in the summer of 2010. The net zero goal for this building was achieved using off-the-shelf technologies and design solutions and operation strategies that are familiar to designers, builders, and operators. The RSF was designed to minimize its energy consumption so that on-site renewable energy generation could meet on a source energy basis all of the remaining energy needs for this building. Now that the RSF has operated as a net zero building for more than 10 years, and NREL has applied the lessons learned from this building to other buildings on our campus, we're now taking the next steps, pushing the boundary even further. And we're exploring how to make our operations on our campus net zero carbon. So we're going from net zero energy on a building by building basis to looking at how do we become net zero carbon overall. The RSF, the building we're in now, it actually has no fossil fuel equipment located within the building. However, it does draw thermal energy from the district energy system on the NREL campus, which is partially supported by fossil fuel equipment. So one of the things that we're doing right now, we're actively engaged in doing right now, is identifying solutions and investigating the mechanisms for implementing the solutions to convert our campus central energy system to be a zero carbon system, which will in turn usher the RSF, the Research Support Facility, from being just a net zero energy building to being a fully net carbon, zero net carbon building as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing today's Sustainable Speaker Series discussion, and I'm sure that it'll be very relevant to the work that we're doing right here at NREL to decarbonize our own operations. So Andrew, back to you.
Thank you, Sheila. And that you really captured there, Sheila, the extraordinary progress that's happening here, the demonstration that NREL is providing here to the rest of the federal community about what can be done. And one might think, very natural for NREL and part of the NREL, core competency and deliverable, but I can't do it at my agency that's not, laser focused on this issue. And I'm happy to report through our experience here just in Colorado over the past few days, be it Fort Carson, be it downtown, again, regional headquarters of the Environmental Protection Agency, or the Denver Federal Center, which hosts a whole number of federal agencies, this exact same kind of work is happening. And happening in manifest ways. We're going to go to the next slide about where you can find more information, and we're going to tweet out some of the photos of the experience that we're having on the trip. So I would call your attention to that. But without further ado, I'd love to go to our speaker. Here's the site as mentioned. Join us on Twitter at White House CSO, and please do take a look at sustainability.gov, where you can find, if you haven't seen it yet, the federal sustainability plan and all sorts of information on an agency level, on a government-wide level, about how we're doing and where we're headed. Moving to the main event here, and Donnel, couldn't be more pleased to introduce Donnel. He is the founder of BlocPower. He is a climate tech startup founder and sensation, who has birthed this extraordinary company that has this private sector mission and this social mission, and delivering on that in extremely unique ways. And what they do is they analyze, finance, and install sustainable upgrades in buildings throughout the United States. They have a particular focus on creating jobs for local low-income workers, and they want to have high impact on the communities that they're serving to deliver, better health outcomes, as well as better building performance, as well as better finances. So nobody could say it better than Donnel. So I'm going to turn it over to Donnel and welcome and thank him again for joining us today.
I'm super excited to be here with all of you. Andrew, thanks so much. Michelle, Sheila, it's been great to listen and learn more about the sustainability plans, which are ambitious and necessary and achievable. I'm so excited about this conversation. I'm so excited that I threw out all of my notes and my prepared remarks. I do have a PowerPoint, which we will go through briefly, but I had this whole thing planned, and then the Senate deflation bill was announced late last night, and I'm just so excited about it, as I'm sure so many of you are, as so many people around the world are, around the opportunity that we have as Americans to really lead the world and lead this nation forward on climate change, on fighting deflation, on lowering the price of prescription drugs and healthcare. It's just an unbelievable time, and you guys are right in the thick of, I think, frankly, you're humanity's best chance, bluntly, to really address the climate crisis, because I think that the leadership that comes from the United States federal government is sorely needed globally. And I learned that I went to Glasgow. I went to the climate negotiations for the first time. I'd never been. I was really excited. And it was amazing to get there and see people from all over the world who've devoted their entire career and their life to climate, different languages, different clothes, different heights, but everybody was serious, and they were there to try to push forward a global deal. But what was needed then and now was that they were all looking to us, the Americans, to really set the tempo around what's possible to achieve in this moment. I was alarmed and surprised, and I guess pleased, by the kind of role that folks around the world really had for us, and how much they were looking to us as Americans to really set the tempo. And it's my opinion that the work that you guys do in the federal government is the most important part of that. I'm gonna talk a little bit about BlocPower, but I'm actually gonna talk and share some things with you all that we've never spoken about publicly before, which is frankly that BlocPower wouldn't exist without the federal government. I mean, when I was a student at Columbia Business School, I got an email from the US Department of Energy that they were looking to figure out how to do energy efficiency in small commercial buildings. I was traveling on a business school's trip, so I stayed up all night in my hotel and wrote an application to this Department of Energy RFP, and I got a letter that my concept proposal, my 5-page concept paper made sense, and they wanted to proceed with a full proposal, and so I started skipping classes in business school to try to find time to put together a proposal to the U.S. Department of Energy around the kinds of ways that I thought that innovation could be brought to the energy efficiency industry through software. And I wrote up that proposal and got another letter that we've been selected to negotiate our award with the U.S. Department of Energy. And I remember I have my final exam for one of my favorite classes, an emerging markets class in business school up at Columbia, New York. But the White House had asked me to come down to the Eisenhower building for a meeting to begin the negotiations with my U.S. Department of Energy award and some of the folks from DOE and the White House and the Eisenhower building. And I had to decide whether I was going to skip my final examination in my business school emerging markets class and take Amtrak down to DC so that I could make this meeting at the Eisenhower building to discuss the DOE project, which I didn't know that we were actually going to get. I mean, thought it was a long shot. So I decided to skip my exam. I emailed my professor in B school and I said, look, we got this opportunity down in DC. Want to go down to the Eisenhower building and talk with folks from the Department of Energy around the way that we think about software and financing to innovate energy efficiency and greening buildings. And I thought the professor would be really excited and be like, oh, great, that's what business school's all about. Like, go down there and let me know what you learn. Or maybe he'd be like, don't even worry about the exam. Just write a paper about what you learned while you're down in the Eisenhower building and we'll grade that paper. He was like, look, if you skip this exam, I'm going to fail you. You're going to fail this class and you won't graduate from business school on time. And so that made it a tougher decision. But I decided to jump on the train and come down to DC. I took a makeup class over the summer, was able to graduate with a little bit behind my class, but was able to celebrate with them when they graduated. But fortunately was able to win the contract from the U.S. Department of Energy to look at the ways that software could innovate the engineering and the financing and the construction management of energy efficiency in low-income buildings. And so everything that we've built at BlocPower comes from that initial relationship with the U.S. Department of Energy. We've been fortunate as a startup to have this beautiful relationship with the federal government starting in 2013 that's really allowed us to build and expand and kind of learn, again, on all the amazing work that you all do. I'm not just saying that or blowing smoke. BlocPower is a beneficiary of amazing work that's been done at DOE, at EPA, at the Department of Commerce. And so we're really grateful to you all for that. Where we are now at BlocPower is we're focused on smarter, greener, healthier buildings for all. And we are signing contracts with cities across America to decarbonize every single building in the city. The first city to agree to do this was Ithaca, New York, where Cornell University is located. They've got about 6,000 buildings. And we have 7.5 years before 2030. And we're going to decarbonize all 6,000 buildings in that city using a mix of heat pumps, air source heat pumps, and geothermal heat pumps. We're going to engineer, finance, and install those heat pumps using local contractors and local workers to go building to building and install sustainability upgrades for every building in that city. And hopefully every 30th building or 40th building will put in an electric vehicle charging station so that we can start to charge up some of the vehicles there. So that's the first building in the world to commit to decarbonizing every single building, Ithaca, New York. And the second city is Menlo Park, California, which is where a lot of Silicon Valley stuff is. Facebook, Meta is headquartered there. There's a bunch of venture capital firms that are headquartered there, and including the few that have invested in us in BlocPower. And they have about 10,000 buildings, and we're going to decarbonize every single building in that city. And there's a few other cities that we're working on that aren't public yet but there's a few other cities across America that we are going to announce that we have signed agreements with them to decarbonize every building in the city. And so that is what BlocPower is about. I will take 5 or 10 minutes to kind of go through these slides relatively quickly, because I want to get into the details of how the federal government and the great work that's been done has really allowed BlocPower to be in a position to be a platform that can help cities to decarbonize itself fully. Slide. Thank you. So what's the problem? Next slide. The problem is that there's 5 million medium-sized buildings throughout America. And when I say medium, I mean they're not a single-family home. They're bigger than that, but they're not as big as a skyscraper. Like they're not the Empire State Building. They're medium-sized building. And I think most of our federal buildings that you guys own and manage fit into this category. So there's 5 million of these medium-sized buildings, small and medium buildings throughout America. They waste about $100 billion per year on fossil fuel energy that they pay for and burn and waste and floats out the window. And it's 7% of US greenhouse gas emissions if you look at EIA data. Next slide. And so it's complicated. It's a massive opportunity. We think it's going to cost a little over $1 trillion to focus on these buildings. We think it'll cost like $4 trillion to green and decarbonize, you know, all 125 million buildings across America. But the good news is there's over 150, I think it's 200 now, 200 American cities that have committed that they are going to be fossil fuel free by 2030 or 2040 or 2050. And the question is, how do we actually pull all this off? Next slide. So the solution is in part what we've learned from you all at the federal government. Next slide. We want to identify what projects make sense. We want to identify which projects make sense in terms of sustainability for all of these buildings. We want to do that on a building by building basis. We then want to be able to finance the upgrades in these buildings up front. We know that many building owners across America don't have $100,000 laying around to decarbonize their, 4-unit apartment building, or a church or a synagogue or a mosque may not have $1 million available to decarbonize their building. And so we want low interest community finance that's accessible, so that we can finance the upfront costs of decarbonizing buildings and have that repaid over time, kind of like a mortgage for decarbonizing a building. And then last, we know that we need an amazing American workforce that's tech enabled, that's using mobile computing, cloud computing, augmented reality to lower the cost of delivering well-engineered decarbonization construction projects on a building by building basis across America. We know we have a shortage of these folks right now, but what an amazing opportunity to retrain and rehire young people across America to reinvigorate our construction industry and make it a tech-enabled green construction industry that uses cutting-edge software from day one. So massive opportunity to do that, particularly with vulnerable communities, ex-offenders and returning citizens, vulnerable people who, young people who aged out of foster care and are likely to become homeless. Let's get them into green construction and teach them tech-enabled green construction. So these are the 3 pillars in our view of how we get this done. Next slide. So as we talked about, we're going to identify the particular pieces of hardware that are needed in each and every building. What brand of hardware, what type, what size? Is it an air source mini split heat pump, or is it a VRF heat pump? If so, what brand do we want to use, and what size, and how much is that going to cost, and can we actually install it? So we want to have software and technology that helps us to lower the cost of identifying which piece of sustainability technology should go into which buildings. And we want to do that for every building in America. Second, we want to be able to finance all of this by partnering with Silicon Valley and Wall Street and with you guys in the federal government. And then third, we want to retrain and rehire a workforce that's tech-enabled to get all this done. Next slide. So we think the way to do this is kind kind of like what EPA has done such a great job of doing at Energy Star. We think you got to label and score all of the buildings. There's 125 million buildings in America. All of them need a score that allows us to tell them how environmentally sustainable they are or how environmentally sustainable they are not. And it's been really interesting. If you go on Zillow or realtor.com, there's a new score, the walkability score. How walkable is the community or the neighborhood where your home is located? And you're like, oh, I want to buy a house and I want it to be super walkable. I want to be able to walk and get coffee in the morning or walk my kid to school. There's a walkability score that's been assigned to millions and millions of buildings across America. Well, we got to do the same thing for sustainability and decarbonization and clean energy, almost like a FICO score or a miles per gallon score. We need to assign this. And so we are using Department of Energy technology and technology from Oak Ridge National Labs, as well as Lawrence Berkeley, that allows us to run energy simulations and predict what kind of decarbonization is possible and needed in millions and millions of buildings across America. I think we've done every building in New York State. I think we're doing Massachusetts and California next. We're doing Georgia pretty soon. By the end of this year, we will have run fossil fuel predictive modeling for over 100 million buildings across America. And we think that's really important to give everybody a baseline score to show them how much work needs to be done in order to green that building. Next slide. And so we've built out a little platform using EPA and Department of Energy data that allows us to look at all of the buildings in a city and identify which of those buildings are great candidates for heat pumps, for VRF heat pumps or air source, mini split heat pumps in buildings. How many of those buildings are located in communities that need environmental justice? What year were those buildings built? Were they built before or after World War II, which really matters in terms of their energy efficiency? What type of fuel are they on? So we aggregate data from property tax payments and histories, from mortgage histories, all of the data that's available on the building shape and size and age, and fuel usage and permitting records for all the buildings. And we put that into a giant data warehouse for every building in the country. And then we created this tool that allows sustainability managers or folks from the government like yourselves to target and identify different kinds of building projects that make sense for buildings across a city or across a state. And so this is New York City. We can go through and generate a bunch of insights on which buildings across New York City are great candidates for decarbonization, which ones are difficult candidates for decarbonization, and we can start to create budgets and planning for investment grade recommendations as to how to decarbonize those buildings. So we built a bunch of software using a bunch of federal government data and tools. Next slide. Next slide. We have worked with Goldman Sachs as a part of our project with the US Department of Energy to develop a clean energy lease that allows us to lease decarbonization equipment and heat pumps to building owners. And we're really excited about that product because it allows low-income people to afford the cost of decarbonizing in the same way that a mortgage helps people afford a home. Next slide. Next slide. And one of the last things that I wanted to talk to you about this morning quickly is the Civilian Climate Corps that we've been working on in New York, modeled, of course, after President Roosevelt's Conservation Corps in the Great Depression, where they trained and hired able-bodied people to plant trees and dig ditches and kind of begin to lay the foundation for overhauling the infrastructure of America. Well, we want to lay the foundation of sustainability across America, decarbonizing buildings and decarbonizing whole cities. And so we worked with Mayor Eric Adams in New York City to create a Civilian Climate Corps. There's over 1,000 young people that we've hired from low-income communities. The district attorney and the NYPD have given us a list of at-risk young people who they believe are at risk of being involved in crime. And we have trained and hired those people to do clean energy, green construction. You can see this young man here. He's got his iPad. He's got a little augmented reality camera on top of his construction hat that allows him to build a 3D map of the building that he's going into, that he's going to map and plan to decarbonize. And so we've trained and hired 1,000 of these young people. I think we have about 500 of them on staff right now. And we send them building to building in New York City to begin to help us green buildings. And what's been great is they're gaining work experience, they're getting a real world trade, they're getting paid because we're paying $20 an hour up to $40 an hour so they can take care of themselves and their families. And then after the program's over, after 12 months of work, they've got resume, they got experience, and they can go get hired by a green construction firm that needs some skilled labor. So we're really excited about this program. Next slide. These are the communities that we hired from. They're the highest crime communities in New York City, in Brooklyn and Harlem and in Queens and in the South Bronx, Eastern Queens, out in Jamaica, Queens, Central and East Brooklyn. Highest rates of gun violence throughout the city, highest rates of domestic violence, highest rates of HIV, 60%. Unemployment in certain pockets, like the one in this photo. This is the poorest census tract in New York City. It's where Mike Tyson grew up, Brownsville, Brooklyn, and there's still really high rates of long-term chronic unemployment there, largely due to folks' status as returning citizens. So we train and hire these people to do clean energy. Next slide. These are some of our workers. We really thought it was interesting post George Floyd to think about the ways that training and hiring at-risk young people and putting them to work in green construction in a moment where the Biden-Harris administration is investing in greening buildings and green infrastructure across America. We just thought that was an interesting frame, and so very focused on that. Next slide. Here is a project at Rikers Island, the notorious New York City jail. And we took some of our workers and trainees, many of whom had only been to Rikers Island when they had been incarcerated or their family members are incarcerated there. And we did a great solar carport project with them. And it was really nice for some of them because they said, look, I just, this is really a painful place with a lot of painful memories for me when I was locked up here, but I get to come back and get paid to do something positive and put up some solar panels. The electricity that's generated is sold to low-income communities, I want to say in Harlem. And these are the kinds of projects that this Clean Energy and Civilian Climate Corps can work on. Next slide. Here is a church, a Presbyterian church in Queens, in one of the high crime communities in Jamaica, Queens. And we are electrifying and decarbonizing this church. They were burning oil for their heat and for their hot water 7 days a week, all year round. And we ripped out the oil system and put in an all-electric heating and cooling and hot water system for this Presbyterian church in Queens. So really excited about these kinds of projects. Next slide. And here we are using Biden-Harris administration funding to install rooftop community-owned internet networking. So there's fiber that runs up to a HUD public housing complex in the Bronx. And we run that fiber up to the roof of the building and then use these mesh network antenna to provide low-cost internet from rooftop to rooftop. We don't have to dig into the ground in order to run fiber. We can use existing fiber that we have and just expand that network from rooftop to rooftop. We're really, really excited about this program. It allows us to connect low-income communities to the internet. Of course, that's so important during COVID. It also allows us to connect the clean energy devices and appliances that we install, many of which need to be connected to the cloud. We're able to provide that connectivity. Next slide. So what happens when you employ 1,200 residents of gun violence impacted areas? Next slide. We've gotten over 800 of these folks certified by OSHA to remove hazardous lead and mold and asbestos from our nation's older buildings, particularly those in communities that need environmental justice. And so far we've gotten 200 people long-term full-time jobs outside of our program. Everyone is paid by us. They have a salary, they have a job with us, but we look to find them long-term jobs as a part of this project. And so we've done that for a significant percentage of people already. Next slide. And in the high crime communities that these young people come from, gun violence has declined by 30%. Really excited about that. Next slide. So to wrap, here's a gentleman named Javon. He said before he started working with BlocPower in the Civilian Climate Corps program, he was just kind of freelancing and do whatever I could to make $1. That's like, he was like selling drugs, I think is what he actually was doing. Well, I don't know if Javon was selling drugs. Let me take that back. Let me not say that about Javon. But a lot of our folks were selling drugs. There actually is a whole street gang that was selling illegal narcotics. There was 50 of them. And they came to us and said, look, we hear you guys are training and hiring people for jobs. We're like, yeah. They're like, we want in. And we're like, okay, are you guys ready to commit to, work and be trained and learn green construction? They said, absolutely. And we said, well, what about the narcotic stuff you guys are doing? You're not gonna be able to do that anymore. They said, look, that stuff is too dangerous. We've got children. We're not proud of the way we make money right now. It actually doesn't pay as well, and it's just not safe. We'd far rather have a job in green construction where we can leave a low-income community and move out to the suburbs because we're making $100,000 a year as a construction project manager or as an electrician. We would vastly prefer because it's 2 to 3 times as much money as they make now, and it's just safer. Anyway, back to Javon. Before he started working at BlocPower, he was freelancing. When he heard about the program, he decided to try it out. He got hands-on training. They give you a chance. They believe in you. Next slide. That's it. So I went through all of this. I wanted to make the point that, one, it's possible to decarbonize buildings and decarbonize whole cities. And so I'm so grateful to the Biden-Harris team for setting that goal for the federal government internally. But second, I wanted to thank you guys for the great work that has resulted in the data and tools that my company uses to decarbonize buildings and train and hire hundreds of workers. And then last, as you guys are embarking on your own work, as employees who will be leading the world and expanding the universe of what's possible for all of us in the clean energy and sustainability fields. Obviously, the federal government owns a ton of buildings. The ways that you guys are thinking about using, procurement, training and hiring folks from local low-income communities nearby. On 125th Street in Harlem, we've got the Adam Clayton Powell building, a beautiful giant federal building there. How do we train and hire local folks from Harlem to green that building, who will then increase the overall supply of qualified construction firms in Harlem, who can then go off and be qualified to green the rest of Harlem? That's the kind of model that I think we should be looking at. And I know with the great work that you guys are doing, that we'll be continuing on that kind of path. So looking forward to any questions or comments or feedback that you guys have for me, but really excited to be here with you all today.
Thanks, Donnel. Great presentation, and I think really timely in maybe even a little embarrassingly in that we often talk about sustainability in these really high level, jargon heavy terminology, like the 2050 plan that I laid out before and the setup to you. And you made this real, and you make this real by telling your own story, by telling the story of the communities that you're working in, showing us the buildings of the communities that you're working in, the people who you're employing, and the opportunities they have beyond that. So I can't think of a better way to illustrate impact than what you provided for us today. Eager to dive in. Before I do that, I also like to thank you for bringing up the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Exciting moment late yesterday when that was announced. As you noted, it was a late night for us here in Colorado as we poured through that. It is a huge accelerant to the work that we're doing here, and I just attach it to the sustainability plan real quick as we move to questions and share with our community here what it means. And like in short, in dollars, to the core of the sustainability plan, there's over $9 billion dedicated directly to the work that we're doing. Money like $3 billion that's going to go to the U.S. Postal Service to further electrify their next generation fleets for the carrier deliveries and the infrastructure that's necessary to put that in. Huge shot in the arm. Postal Service, who I think for people who are tracking, committed to making 10% of that fleet electric a year ago, changed that to 20. And last week they announced they would move that up to 40% of their fleet. So we're going to be able to take their 40% commitment, add $3 billion and push them closer, if not all the way to 100%. So amazing boost for the Postal Service. There's $250 million in that to forward the effort of green buildings. There's $2.5 billion in that to quote unquote buy clean. So we're using lower carbon and zero carbon construction materials in our construction. All that's going directly to the efforts that we're talking about here. And then we just look at the climate aspects of that bill overall. Hundreds of billions of dollars going into accelerating the clean energy and clean transportation, which will, accrue directly to our efforts to get to 100% carbon-free electricity for our own consumption and our efforts to green that fleet faster. So huge night and huge effort, and deep thanks for we've been working here at the White House closely with Senator Schumer's staff and others, and deeply grateful for their work as well as all the leadership that went into delivering on this. So thanks for raising it. Happy to add a little more detail to it. But let's go to back to the main event here, Donnel. And as we discussed and shared early on, we are able to bring in feds from all around the country to this conversation thanks to Zoom. The way that we are able to bring them into the conversation itself is for them to share questions with us up front. And so we've got some questions from the Fed community for you, for me. I want to make sure we cover a couple of those. And I, kick off with a couple of those to right now, which is you addressed it in part through your presentation with the challenges and the opportunities, but it'd be helpful to dig in a little bit further. Big question that we have as we work through the 300,000 plus buildings in the federal portfolio to do the same work that you're doing in the public and private sector outside the federal government. Where am I going to get the money? How are we going to pay for this? This is so expensive. Like you to dig in a little bit further on the finance question, as well as the savings component, because I think that the financing and then the savings piece gets lost, and it's great to hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so fundamentally, there's been a breakthrough in sustainability technology. No one knows about it, although it was part of the deflation plan that was discussed yesterday with Leader Schumer, and it's part of the president's goal. So cold climate heat pumps used to be this kind of thing that didn't really work when it got too cold. They would just not work that well. And so you used to have an electric heat pump, and then you'd have to have your backup fossil fuel system for when it dropped below freezing. And then you'd switch from electric to backup fossil fuels because the heat pumps wouldn't work really well when it got cold. But now, 4 or 5 years ago, there is a new set of inventions, a variable refrigerant valve or flow valve that actually makes it feasible for this technology to work perfectly in super cold conditions. So it's called a cold climate heat pump. And that hardware breakthrough, I believe, is just as important as like the iPhone or Tesla. It's a new piece of hardware that's a new platform that allows us to do all kinds of amazing things that we could not do before it existed. So this technological invention, the cold climate heat pump, allows us to fully 100% electrify buildings in a way that we could not 4 or 5 years ago. So that's one part. When we fully electrify buildings, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 70% in many instances. And we're also reducing fuel costs by 20, 40, 50% for those buildings. And so we're using less energy to heat and cool our buildings, and our federal buildings will be using less energy if we shift them to heat pumps or geothermal. And the energy dollars, the annual energy budget that we're spending on fossil fuels, which we're paying for and consuming and using to heat up and to cool and provide hot water in our federal buildings, we can use that existing energy budget to finance conversions to more sustainable technologies. And so what we do in the lowest income buildings in America, buildings that don't have a FICO score that is, would amount to anything from Goldman Sachs perspective, we've been able to work with Goldman and Microsoft to create a financing product where we lease clean energy equipment to these buildings, and the cost of the equipment is repaid over 15 to 20 years by the energy bill reduction that is generated by the equipment itself. The equipment is so much more efficient that it generates annual energy savings. That means you can take part of your energy budget and amortize it and use it to upgrade and convert your buildings to clean energy. And so that's the tool, the financial product that we've been able to develop with Goldman and Microsoft. There's a lot of people that'll come to you guys and, try to sell you fancy energy savings contracts that may or may not always work out. But keeping it simple and focusing on how to use your energy budget, your future energy savings to help finance conversions to decarbonize federal buildings is, I think, exactly where we need to be. And just on the post office thing, we're really excited. One of our sister startups, Aclima, is going to be installing air quality sensors on post offices across America that will allow us to map pollution, methane, black carbon, nitrogen dioxide that we may be breathing in as we're walking our kids to school. The post office can be a place where you walk in and you pull out your smartphone and it tells you how much local pollution is going on around the post office. And there's just amazing things that we can do with federal buildings.
Great. That was a twofer. And that the second question I was going to ask that came into us was, is the technology really there? Can we do heat pumps in cold climates? And you've already presented in the slides, Ithaca, not the warmest place in the world,
Right.
Come January, that it is in fact here. Anything that, like, building on that piece as we move to the next question, why the technology is here, the information and the understanding, the education is not there. Anything to say about that and how we make that more pervasively known?
Well, that's why it's so important for everyone on this phone call to lead. You guys are technically and technologically sophisticated in the federal government. No matter what the rumors or whatever say, you guys are technically sophisticated. And I know that because we're using your technologies. And I think that the federal government leading the way and inspiring through the use of cold climate heat pumps, through geothermal, through the new drills that are available in the geothermal industry, through the use of machine learning and predictive modeling. Now that the cost of machine learning and computing software has plummeted, the cost of smartphone and mobile computing and cloud computing has plummeted. This means that we can do a ton of stuff that we just couldn't do 10 years ago. And we can do it with our federal buildings. And so I do think there's a role to inspire. Maybe you can't do the entire 30,000 building portfolio all at once, but you can do one building in every city. And we're gonna get the best folks from our team together in each city and think through how are we going to decarbonize one federal building in each city or each region. And I do think if we started with something small and actionable like that, and then shared case studies across the federal government, that we would be able to do enough federal buildings to inspire customers across America. Again, I think that the Energy Star model or the miles per gallon rating that we provide to vehicles, Energy Star for appliances, that kind of thing for buildings is going to help drive consumer awareness at the point of sale, at the point of purchase of any building. Hey, what's the sustainability score for this building? Does it have heat pumps? If not, how much is it going to cost to reduce my emissions from this building by 70%? That's where we want the consumer to be thinking and asking those kinds of questions. And I think that the federal government is the only entity in the world that can really lead that change.
Yeah, we're here to do that. I can attest from this visit in Colorado, and warm, balmy Colorado, as it's known. We just visited a construction site of a former munitions plant that was built to aid and deliver on the war effort in the 40s, is being converted right now, turned into a new retrofitted office building for Department of Interior employees, 350, 400 employees. And the primary source of heating is going to be 2 heat pumps that have been built into that building. And so we're doing it live. That information, as Donnel is denoting, still needs to get out to this community here and to the rest of leadership. So we want to share that, want to lift that up. Most of all, at this time, at the top of the hour, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, we want to thank everybody for joining us today for this federal speaker series. We want to thank Donnel in particular for the inspiration, the information that you provided, and the work that you're doing day to day.
No, thank you. I'm inspired by all of you and the great work that you guys are doing. And I hope you accept my implicit challenge. You guys are doing great work, and we look forward to seeing the continued results of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll take that challenge. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.